Now that the database is created and we've added some tables, let's look at how to add data into it. This will be done using the data manipulation language of SQL. The data manipulation language includes 4 categories of action. These include insert data to add data to one or more tables, update data to modify the content of one or more rows in the database, delete data to remove information from the database, and finally query data to retrieve information from one or more tables. Let's have a closer look at each of them. First up, insert data. To insert data into a table, we simply need to write insert into with the table name, followed by the columns into which we want to insert the data into. If we actually were inserting data into all the columns, we could actually forget about the column names, but in general it's good practice to actually write them down. And then we follow this by the actual values that we're going to insert into these columns, and so the values need to be in the same order as the column declaration that we did. And so value 1 in this case would go into column 1, value 2 will go into column 2, and so on. Once again, let's execute this command within MySQL Workbench. And so here I want to insert data into the students table. I specified the ID, the first name and last name. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to execute this command. Oh, and now I got an error. If you remember, we defined that the column date of birth cannot be null. And so here, because we did not specify a default value for this column, and I did not actually specify what I was going to insert into this column, I got an error here. And so instead, I can delete this here. And I'm going to uncomment these lines, where I'm now specifying the date of birth. So let's execute this, and now it worked. If we would like to insert more than one item at a time, we can actually just pull our insert into query like this. And so here, for example, I'm going to add a couple of more students. Each of them have their own date of birth and names. These are the same names that we've seen before in our examples. So if I run this command, I can see that I've inserted now 7 rows. And so yeah, so all you need to do is just put commas between them. In cases where we need to update some information within the database, we can do so using update data. To do so, we simply need to specify update and the table name where we want to modify some information. Then, we specify the new values that we want to set to some column using a key value style. So for example, column 1 equals value 1. In this case, value 1 will be set to column 1, then column 2 equals value 2, and so on. Finally, if we want to modify specific items in our database, we can do so by specifying a condition that defines these items with the where clause. As an example of the update command, let's say that we would like to update the line for Carol Urschel here. Turned out that her name was not Carol, it was Caroline. Then she actually changed her last name to something else, and her date of birth was also wrong. Turns out we were completely wrong about her here. And so to do so, we simply need to type in update with the table name. So the table name is students in this case. We want to set the first name to Caroline, last name to something else, so Herschel Gauthier in this case, for example, and then the 10th of 2000. And the where command here, as I was mentioning before for the condition, we know that the line corresponding to Carol Urschel was the ID with 1002 here. And so if I run this command, everything went well now, and her name, last name, and date of birth have been modified. Similarly, in cases where we want to actually delete data instead of modifying it, we can do so using delete data. Delete data has this form where we say delete from a specific table with the table name where some condition applies. And so, if we want to actually delete some students from the students table, we can do it using a specific condition. So in this case, we're going to use the primary key since we know that it uniquely identifies our rows. So we want to delete the student with the ID 1003, which would correspond to Annie Cannon in this case here. And so we can delete it using this line. So if I execute this line, it worked well, and now the student has been deleted.